Hey y'all, welcome to Tears and Joy in Your 20s. I'm your host, Julia Light, and I am so glad you're here. Navigating your 20s comes with a lot of highs and lows, a lot of freedom, and a lot of uncertainty. That's why I created a space for conversation about all of it. On this podcast, you'll hear interviews of creatives, entrepreneurs, people doing big things in their 20s telling their story, tears and joy and all. I hope this helps you know you're not alone. There's so much to look forward to, and you can savor this season right in the messy middle.
Hey y'all, welcome back to the podcast. Today I have my new friend Jordan Deen on the podcast. Hey Jordan.
Hey y'all.
Hey y'all, you sound so American.
I'm definitely not. I'm definitely not from the South. If I was from the South, what would my name be? I feel like everyone has like a double barrel name.
Jordan. Jordan's like
My name would be like Billy Bob Horton.
Billy Bob, right?
Do you know what I mean?
Everyone I know from Texas is named Billy Bob. Honestly though, there's a place called Billy Bob's that we would go
Is that right?
all the time. Yeah, it's the world's largest honky tonk. Okay, I'm gonna read your bio.
Yes.
Jordan.
Okay. Absolutely.
Okay, y'all. So, if you don't know Jordan, I just met him through mutual friends.
did.
And I
We
said,
met on
hey,
Sunday.
do you want to be on the podcast? It was 4 days ago. So, this is so fun. We're all going to get to know him together. But I'm going to read his bio for y'all. So, Jordan Deen is an experienced multidisciplinary creative producer. He's worked with various organizations across Europe and America. Jordan has a podcast, Voicemails to My Younger Self, where he creates conversation around inner child healing within the themes of fatherlessness. So I'm really excited for our conversation today, Jordan.
I'm very grateful to. This is not something I do. I don't go on podcasts.
It
So,
seems like you do, honestly.
I have my own podcast, and even then, like that's very much like a very kind of intimate conversation with a dear friend, and so
Yeah.
like this is a very new experience for me. So I'm just very grateful. Thank you.
Wow. Okay. Well, Jordan, I just would love if you would tell us kind of your story of your 20s so far. You're right in the middle of your 20s right now. So just tell us about you. You're a creative producer. You have a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
You're a multidisciplinary artist and media person. How'd you get into doing that? And just
Tell you about my 20s.
Yeah.
Wow. I'd love to. That's
whatever.
actually
Yeah.
I love that story because people are often like, "What's your story? Tell me about your life." And I'm like, I can't condense that into minutes.
Yeah.
You know? Whereas my 20s, I've never been asked that before.
Oh.
But actually, I think, for me personally, I think my 20s so far have been my most enjoyable, memorable, special years of my life.
Good.
I think for two different reasons. One, if I compare who I am today to who I was at 20 years old, when I was 20, I was living in Battersea, London with one of my best friends. I was working for a church. I had the worst taste in fashion. I look at pictures and I think I kind of had to erase them from my memory. Just
Oh
'cause
my
I kind
goodness.
of cringe. I remember at one point I had this like bright red hoodie that was like definitely not big enough for me, and it's had the biggest Batman logo on it. And I
Aw.
just rock that around town.
Aw. That's
I can
sweet.
I can feel your secondhand embarrassment.
No.
But also 20 was a really special year because that literally, I had this moment when I was 19 years old where this man took me for a drive, and he's now become like a mentor and a father figure for me. And on that drive, he was one of the first people to kind of just like poke through my story. I was very secretive. I was very guarded. And I don't mean guarded in the healthy sense. I actually mean, people would ask me about my life and I'd find really creative ways to brush over what was really going on. This was the first person to kind of sit me down and go, stop it, tell me what's really going on. And so I tell him, and I told him my story of growing up without a father and kind of how that had impacted me and who my dad was. And I was 19 at the time, and he basically goes to me, "You're reaching out to your dad this year." And I at first rejected it, but then, and I hadn't spoken to him in years, and at first I rejected it, but then I set myself the date. I said, before I hit 20, I'm gonna reach out to him.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
And I was 6 months away, and then I forgot about it. And then all of a sudden, 5 months go by, and I'm weeks away from turning 20. And I remember just having this kind of strange realization. Was like, oh no, I promised myself I'd reach out to him. And so I go to call him. And I call him, and it's like, this number is no longer recognized. And I'm like, what? And I was kind of angry at myself. I could argue I was a little bit confused and disappointed in God.
Yeah.
I was kind of like, God, there was this opportunity that felt like you were leading me down this path of healing, and now this has happened.
Yeah.
It almost built this moment up in my mind.
Yeah, it's
for months.
huge.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I have no idea how to get in touch with him. I called my mum. She didn't know how to get in touch with him. I called my uncle, his brother. No one had his contact.
Wow.
And then it gets to like 2 days before my birthday, and I get this DM, and it was in my requests folder from like a cousin of a cousin, like not even my blood relative. And this guy basically DMs me going, "Hey man, I just wanted you to know I met your dad yesterday. We kind of like bumped into each other in the street." And I was like, what are the chances of that?
Whoa.
My dad lived like an hour away. And I was like, is there any chance you have his number? And he's like, I do actually. I got it yesterday.
Oh my
And it was this
gosh.
divine moment where then I get his
Wow.
number, and then the day before I hit 20, I go to the park. I didn't want to do it at my house because I knew I'd cry.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I can't see my best mate can't see me cry, which is a huge revealer as to where I was even at emotionally at that point.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I walk to the park, call him, have this really strange call where he goes, I've been hoping you'd call me. And it was a really sweet moment. But that for me then set up what my 20s would be.
Wow.
You know, that was almost like, it kind of felt like the final chapter of my teenage years.
Yeah.
Which was almost like walking through a level of pain and discomfort, but not wanting to address anything, not wanting to pursue healing in it. And then I have this massive, almost like, you could call it like a sliding doors moment where I could have called him and I could have not called him.
Yeah.
And I think there's two options, but I think whichever option I pick dramatically impacts how my 20s play out.
Yes.
And so thanks to me picking the difficult route, which was calling him,
Yeah.
my 20s have now looked a lot more like journey of healing,
Wow.
journey of just like redemption. But I don't mean redemption like this crazy legacy story. I even mean on even like a small scale where I feel like, oh my gosh, what a beautiful story. Like some of my favorite movies and TV shows don't have like one big redemption arc. They have all these micro little redemption arcs where you're like, oh my gosh, I love that. No way, that redeems this. And so I feel like that's really been my last 5 years of my 20s, is just being able to experience tons of healing, tons of moments where I was like, wow, like this redeems this thing that happened at 8, and this redeems this thing that happened at 15. And this, and so I'd say that for my 20s. And so, you know, I get to 25, and like I started to compare, you know, I was working for a church, didn't know how to open up to friends, all this kind of stuff. And 5 years later, like, my love for the church has grown even more. Like, I get to work with a few different churches that I deeply love and respect, and I'm really grateful for the communities for even just embracing me like one of their own. Even though, I work with these two churches in the States, one's in San Francisco and one's in New York. And I don't go to either of those churches. I get to visit them a few times a year, which is a real joy. But whenever I'm there, they treat me like one of their own. They treat me like I'm a son of the house, which is a real joy.
It's beautiful.
And so there's just been so much beauty that's come from when I compare 25-year-old Jordan Deen to 20-year-old Jordan Deen.
Wow.
On all different kind of facets of it.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Thank you.
So what did that look like? I mean, I know that's a lot, 5 years, but how did that, so you have this call, you turn 20, you're learning, emotionally opening up, redemption, like what?
Yeah.
That's a big question, but what are some things maybe that stand out, like moments where those changes started to happen?
Honestly, I would pin 95% of it to the people that I feel like God brought into my life. The reason I say the people that God brought into my life is because, and I would suggest you do this too, because I feel like you're someone who has tons of friends. You know family trees, right?
Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago, a friend of mine encouraged me to make a friendship tree, where basically, I love the face you're putting
Wait,
right now.
that's amazing.
Where basically, you write down all your friends, and highlight in yellow the ones that were like divine connections, people that you couldn't have met through someone else.
Wow.
And then write down who they connected you to, who you're friends with, who they connected you to. And you basically end up with this beautiful, you could argue it's not even a tree, it's just like a spider's web.
Wow. Oh, I love that.
But it's beautiful because for me, it's been people that have led to just areas of growth, development, healing, the ability to recognize beauty. Like all of those things have been through people. And so, you know, like for example, the reason I even got to a place where I could call my dad was because of this mentor who sat me down in his car when I was 19.
Yeah.
And even when it comes to like, you know, I now freelance. And so transitioning from working full time for a church to then freelancing, again, that wasn't me, and it wasn't me sitting down watching a YouTube video of how to grind 45 hours a day or whatever.
Yeah.
Like
Oh
it
my
was really just like mentors. Like that same mentor who sat me down in the car when I was 19 was the same guy who became my first client when I went freelance.
Oh, wow.
He just really believed in me. And so it's like, really, I could look back and be like, I did this, but I'm like, it's not true. That'd be a false reality. Like, it wasn't me. It was the folks who, for some reason, you could argue that God had put a burden on their heart for me.
Yeah.
And they just decided to love on me and just be there and step into all these deficits, which perhaps there could be a case made that a father would step in for, And so whether it's like, I have some friends who go to their dads because they need mentorship in like their business stuff. And so their dad can be like, yeah, great, I'll help out with that. Or sometimes friends will go to their dad if they need advice, or friends will go to their dad if they just need to like process something out loud or whatever.
Yeah.
And from the age of 9, I just didn't have that. But
Yeah.
what was very, very, very just something I'm really grateful for, and totally something that I continuously am thanking God for, is the fact that those deficits were all met. So when I needed business advice, I had a father figure I could turn to. When I needed to process something, I had a father. Like every single aspect of my life where I would need a father, the Lord provided a father figure.
Yeah.
Which is amazing.
Wow. That's so beautiful. Man. And what are, like, do you have any cool stories or examples from that time of being like, wait, this is the father figure I needed, or this is something that I didn't know I needed to process about
Yeah.
childhood?
I think 2 stories come to mind. One's a really kind of lighthearted one, and then another one's a really deep one, actually.
Okay.
The lighthearted one is when I was about 6 years old. I remember I was sat in a car with my dad, and people would always be like, dude, your dad is the best driver. It's like, what kind of a flex is that? But the reason they would say that is because he had basically just, obviously right now, when we get in a car, the first thing we do is pull out our phone and type in the destination on maps.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, I suppose when he was growing up, they didn't have that.
Yeah.
And he didn't really like maps, so he would just learn roads. Like, in the UK. And so there were times where someone would be like, I need to, like, he lived west of London. People would be like, I need you to drop me off somewhere in Bristol. And he'd be like, cool. And he'd be like, I think I can get you there. And then you'd sit in a car and he'd get you there. And there was just this something about, like, he kind of prided himself in just being learning roads in a really kind of in a really kind of cool way. Anyway, people would just kind of be like, he's one of the best drivers we know. And so when I was 6, I was like, can you teach me how to drive? And he was like, in 10 years, when you turn 16, I'll teach you how to drive. And then, of course, when I'm, I hit 9 years old, and then he leaves. And the reason I say 9 is, and I've said this on my own podcast before, but it's so blurry because I don't know when he left. It was somewhere between the ages of 8 and 10.
Okay.
And that memory is so strange, but I feel like it might have been 8, 9, 10, whatever. But when he left, I didn't necessarily recognize immediately the deficits it would leave behind. And then, of course, I get to 16 and now I'm allowed to learn how to drive. And I have to book an instructor and I just can't help but be like, this should have been him teaching me.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And I kind of held that with me. And the truth is, I live right next to London and I have never needed a car, thankfully. Because you just get the train everywhere and the tube everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I can kind of make do. But it wasn't until I was at my best friend's house in California about a year and a half ago. And I had this really sweet redeeming moment where his dad had basically got a new car. And I was just like, what's it like to drive? And he goes, well, come on, I'll show you. And I thought that he was going to drive me around. And he gives me the keys and he's like, go on, you drive. And I was like,
His new car.
And I'm like,
Oh.
firstly, in England, we drive on the other side of the road. So I do not feel comfortable. He goes, don't worry, I'll teach you. Like, let's just do it.
Oh.
So we get in his car. And what I thought would be like a little loop around the block becomes this like 45-minute just trip on these open roads. And it was the
Wow.
most like sweet drive. And he's guiding me and he's like, right, this road's open now, floor it. And it was just this really sweet moment that we had together. And I remember just feeling, I was like, look, he's not my dad. But at the same time, it really felt like it met me in that space. And that's kind of what I was talking about, like these
Wow.
micro redemption.
Yes, the
Where it's
little moments.
Little moments
yeah.
where it's like, to someone else, they'd be like, all right, mate, great, you drove a car in America. But
Yeah.
it's like, no, you don't understand. Like, at that point in time, 6-year-old me And then 16-year-old me felt so met and seen and loved in that moment. And so that was like a little lighthearted moment. But I think a moment I think about a lot is, you know, as I've kind of gone through life and tried to navigate things, there have always been these moments where it's like, man, I wish I could just go to my dad and be like, here's what's going on. What do you think?
Yeah.
And sadly, not only was he kind of absent, but he also just sadly has gone through this real struggle with his own mental health. And it's declined and declined and declined. And it's sadly because of his own kind of drug abuse and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That he is at a point where actually he couldn't, even if he wanted to, he couldn't like hold space and listen and then kind of create thoughts that could be a blessing to whatever I'm in. And I remember I'd kind of always been craving that. And so for me, when I was going through like a major life transition, you know, I told you I was working for a church full time. And then I really felt like actually I wanted to step away from that and then do this thing here. I didn't know how to do it. Didn't know what that would look like. And I just needed to process that with someone. And one of my absolute heroes, he was my pastor, he was my mentor, he was my shepherd. His name's Robbie Lewis. He basically took me out for a walk. And it was about a 3-hour walk. We basically this was all during COVID, so you couldn't actually go into anything. You could only walk. And so we did that. And I remember he just asked me all the important questions. But more so than that, he just listened and he kind of just sat with me. And I think in that moment, again, I felt like a son. There are just these moments where I feel like a son, and it can be with a friend. Wow. It can be with, and I don't mean that in a weird sense where it's like I'm being parented. It's not necessarily that parent-child-adult dynamic. It's more so I feel like I no longer need to kind of perform or hold or kind of like do. I get to just simply be in front of this person.
Yeah.
And I have this amazing friend in London called John Toms. And the reason I say John Toms is his name's John, but some people are like first and last name people.
Oh, yeah.
It's like in New York, we've got Ashley Anderson.
Yeah.
You would never just say Ashley.
Yeah.
Or like, you know, even Ale Sikmai, I feel like that's a two name.
Yeah.
And so there's this guy in London called John Toms, and what started off as a joke has now become a really, really deep, integral part of just how I operate. He would always be like, he'd make these weird little comments where he'd be like, oh, you're just being a son right now, aren't you? And I was like, yeah, I'm being a son. And then before I knew it, I was like, wow, like he kind of just encourages all the brothers in his life to kind of stop striving, stop like doing, stop performing, and just simply just being. And I think in that moment when I went on that kind of super long walk with Robbie, he just kind of created this space where I could just be and process. I remember in that moment being like, wow, I felt so fathered because I got to actually process a huge life transition and figure stuff out and go, I'm thinking I might just take this risk and kind of bet on myself and become a freelancer. What do you think? And he just walked me through all of that. And so I'd say that was one of the moments that comes to mind.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And that's like impacted the whole trajectory of your life and your career. Because if you hadn't made that decision, what would you be doing right now?
Right.
Something else.
I have no idea. I find that so weird. Like, even the fact that I've met you has been because of that decision to kind of like step out. And like the truth is like for a lot of people, when they set up their own businesses and go freelance, like the fruit of their career becomes like money or like, I don't know, you could list a name of things that the fruit of their
prestige or
yeah, sure.
connections or
The fruit of my career has been deep friendship. I'm like, I feel like I'm win. You know what I mean?
You win.
I'm like, I genuinely wouldn't trade this for like other stuff because it's like along the way I did a project here and then like this happened, or I did a project here and then this happened. And my favorite story, and actually how I'm even connected to New York now, is I did a project in 2021 and then there were some payment issues because my bank couldn't accept money from US dollars. Thankfully we fixed that now, so we're all good. But yeah, 2021, I kind of had this basic bank account, this basic business bank account with Monzo. Have you ever heard of Monzo before?
No.
It's like, how do I explain this? It's like, you know when someone's like, I'll Venmo you?
Yeah.
Right? It's similar to that, except Monzo's an actual bank as well.
Okay.
But it's kind of that level of casual.
Yeah.
But like, if you're like invoicing an organization, you wouldn't be like, yeah, Venmo me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Hopefully
I'm like,
not.
so I'm sending like Monzo bank details to these businesses, and these like this American organization couldn't pay me. And so the payment ended up being delayed by like a month or so, which was fine. It was a 4-month project, so I still got paid during the project. But at the end, they felt so bad that they gifted me this ticket to like this Christian creative conference.
Oh, wow.
Which I had no intention of going to, because I was like, well, like, cool, man, good for you guys. I bless you into it. Like, I won't be there. But then I get given this free ticket, and I'm like, I guess I kind of have to go now. Otherwise, it'd be really mean if I didn't go. They've bought me this ticket, and it was quite expensive. And so I reluctantly go down, and I just remember the first night. It was almost like this. Again, we look back, and it is a sliding doors moment. You know, the pastor gets up at the end of the kind of the first night, wraps up, and he goes, "You got two options. You can either go to the secret gig, which is going to be held 10 minutes down the road, or you can go to the brewery for a beer, which is going to be 5 minutes down the road." And it was almost like, do I go here or do I go here? And I decided I was going to go to the secret gig. And I'd kind of heard through a grapevine that one of my friends was performing. His name's Gideon. He's been a friend of mine since I was 18. I was like, of course I'm going to go to his gig. And then literally last second, someone just kind of grabbed me by the shoulder and was like, "You're coming to the brewery, right?" And for some reason I just went, "Yeah, of course I am." And so I go down to the brewery. And as I'm in there, I watched this like influx, and I knew it was like crew from like a few other American churches that were kind of clumped up into a group that had all flown over for this conference. It was kind of like the pilot conference they were testing out. And so it was the first one of its sort of like series. And they walk in, and as they walk in, the brewery is full, it's packed. And all of them kind of head to the back of the brewery, and one of them just kind of comes in late and kind of looks a bit lost. So I was like, the least I can do is be like, "Hey man, your friends are just at the back." So I walk up to him and I was like, "Hey man, your friends went to the back," thinking he'd be like, "Thanks man," and just walk off. But instead he just stops and he's like, "Oh, nice to meet you. What's your name?" And I was like, "I'm Jordan." And he's like, "I'm Tom." And I was like, "Oh, you're from the States?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm from Portland." We get talking, and 2 minutes in, he's like, "If you're ever in Portland, you've got a place to stay." I remember just being like, that is wild. Like, you've just met me 2 minutes ago. I could have actually been in here. I could have not been at the church gathering. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then he goes, "Also, you need to meet my friend Keithan." And so then he takes me to the back and he introduced me to Keithan. And then me, Keithan, and Tom basically spend like an hour just hanging out. And right at the end, Keithan's like, "Well, I'm just about to move to New York." And I was like, "That's amazing." I was like, "Do you know folks in New York?" And he's like, "Yeah, a few." But he's like, "Not really." So I think he'd known like just a handful of people, I suppose, just because he was about to move there and start working for this church. And so I was like, "That's so fun. I'd love to visit you sometime." I was like, "Yeah, please do." And then I offered to be their tour guide, and I took them around the city. Anyway, fast forward 6 months, and I decided to take Keithan up on this offer, and I came out for a month. And thankfully I had a
just met you. Oh, we come stay for a month.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
amazing.
I mean, I suppose like one of the perks of being a freelancer is like there's this level of flexibility.
Yeah.
So I can go like, you know, I can go really hard and work hard for 2 months, and then just take a month off and do whatever, you know.
Love.
Super flexible. And so I come out here for a month, and halfway through it was one of my best friend's weddings, which was great. And so it ended up just working out being really, really cool. But I come out here, and literally day one of being in New York, Keithan just introduces me to his world. You know, just like take me around church, be like, "This is one of my best friends from London. This is Jordan." And I just get to meet these beautiful people who then, not only did I just meet them, but I got to form really strong friendships with them.
Yeah.
That actually, I often think I'm like, if I didn't get paid late because of my basic little bank account,
Wow.
and I didn't get offered that ticket to this conference, I wouldn't have this family in New York.
Oh.
You know? And so that's why I say often, I'm like, you know what? Actually, no, the fruit of my career has been deep friendship. Because I'm like, I've actually... you know, I've taken a project here, or I've like gotten a call here, and really it's resulted in a friend.
Yeah.
And like the project's been secondary to that.
That's so beautiful, Jordan. Okay, I'm hearing that you're viewing your life as a story, right? And you're viewing your life as like, because I'm the same way. I think of like, I wrote this, well, this is irrelevant, but I'm the same way. I wrote this whole like essay about 2023 and like sent it to everyone in my Christmas card because I was like, this moment led to this and da 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 da, and like it's so beautiful. But how do you I'm curious because I'm similar. And I actually really think that that's a really healthy way to live. And I actually really want more people to just reflect on their lives and view it as this beautiful story because you are so loved and you are part of a big story. So how has that come about? Do you think like in the moment when you're in the car with your friend's dad, are you like 6-year-old me and 16-year-old me are thinking about it right now, or is it after, or how do you have that lens in your life that's like this moment matters, how do you have that attention?
Well, I think I've had a strange relationship with that because it wasn't until I was maybe 23, 24 where I started to actually look back and be like, whoa, there's actually there's a story of 2023 and then there's a story of Julia, and then there's a story of life. And so it's like there are all these like there's this big story where there are smaller stories and then stories within those stories.
Yes.
If that makes sense. I'm not trying to get too meta or anything.
No, I love it.
And so for me, I think I started to recognize some of those micro stories and almost started to see them kind of like, and this might sound really like cheesy, but kind of like the Marvel franchise, where there is this like overarching narrative, and then within that there are like 26, or I suppose there's more now, but there's 30 or so movies, and then within those movies there are like stories, you know? And so for me, I started to recognize that really over the last few years, where I was like, whoa, and that was when I started to recognize like God's divine redemption and how he has this ability to make beauty from kind of anything. Like I keep hearing this term over the last few days, but genuinely nothing is wasted. Like God has the ability to take any kind of mess and turn it into beauty.
Agreed.
Where I'm going with this is I recognize that when I first kind of noticed that, my brain then just went into storytelling mode, and it almost became, you know how like content creators, there was the rise of the content creators.
Yes.
And they would make vlogs about their days.
Yes.
But then as they started to gain attraction, they then were like, how do I plan my days so that the vlog, they almost started to like plan their days so that the vlog would look a certain way. And to some degree, I then started making plans out of like, what's the story going to be?
Yeah.
Which isn't really necessarily living life.
No.
Because you're kind of just trying to script your own life and trying to be your own sovereign power. And it wasn't until I had like a series of humbling experiences where I was like, irrespective of whatever I plan, God still ends up writing a story in hindsight. And that was what made me kind of give this like release over, where I was like, I need to just do way less than I think I need to do and trust God way more than I think I need to do. And so for me now, what my relationship with it is I kind of make my own plans. I do my own thing. I'm like, sure, I'll go to New York. And I always try and leave like pockets of openness. So like, for example, like even us meeting on Sunday, I didn't have necessarily a locked in plan for the week. I kind of left it very open.
Yeah.
And so then you're like, that was so fun to hang out. Do you want to be on my podcast? And it's like, yeah, great. And it's
I
like,
know.
that's like one small example of like how if you just keep yourself open for things, like there is space for just enjoyment like this, you know?
Yeah.
And so then when it comes to stories, like I think I just recognize that I'm also part of a story that's bigger than myself. And if I think this life is about the story of Jordan Deen, I think I'll have a much cheaper experience of life. Like the fact that it isn't is what helps me live a story that's far richer than it could ever be if I was just in my own hands, in my own control. And so I think that's where kind of I then look towards others, and it's like, you know, like I'm a character now in your story, you're a character now in my story, and it's like, how can I be the best supporting character I can be? So that other people's stories can also hopefully be blessed by my presence and where I am in it. Does that make sense? Did I just ramble? I don't know.
No, that was great. That was really great. And I really relate on trying to sometimes control a story, because for whatever reason, I'm very cognizant of like, I was here 1 year ago today and now I'm doing this. And that's because God put this in my path, and that's so beautiful. But sometimes I'm like, and then this is going to happen. And it's like, okay, maybe it's not. And you just need to accept whatever does happen.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, I get that with like auditions, or, you know, it's like, oh, because I auditioned for this show this time, because it's a year later and I read this book today, then this is, and I'm like, Julia, what? Like you're.
I was in New York 2 years ago, and the plan was I was going to be here for 2 weeks, and then I was going to fly to Minneapolis for 4 days. because one of my best friends was going to propose to his girlfriend, and then I was going to go to California for a week. And I had almost like the post-holiday vlog reel, highlight reel in my head. I could see it.
Oh, yeah.
I was like 2 weeks in New York, a week in Minneapolis, a week in California, and then I fly home, and I just have this like amazing caption of like, the 1 month I got to see all my best friends. Like, you know what I mean? I was like stoked. I was like, I'm so ready. I hate
how we think in content.
Yeah.
Like that is such a thing.
I had the month planned out in content.
Yes. And I think our generation, like people don't talk about that. I'm glad we're talking about this because I sometimes am like, I'm insane. Because I'm like thinking about the Instagram caption that I'm going to make about this, and that can be good. So glad that you feel that too.
But then I had this incredibly like humbling experience where the day before I fly out to Minneapolis, I get a phone call saying, "Hey mate, so sorry, our car just got broken into and your bag was in there. What was in your bag?" And I go, "Well, it was my AirPods, my wallet, and it was my passport." And then I was like, this means I can't fly out tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so what was meant to be 2 weeks in New York, that was why it became a month.
That was the first time you came to New York?
I suppose it was the second time I came. It was the longest I'd ever spent in New York. But what was meant to be 2 weeks in New York became a month because I had to wait for a temporary passport to come through. And this is what was the most humbling, was I had this content planned out. I was like 2 weeks, 1 week.
Yeah.
This sort of like US tour planned out. I was so stoked. Everything was fun. Everything was good. And then now I'm like, I have to stay in New York for 2 more weeks.
Yeah.
And what's crazy is 3 days after, kind of while I was in extra time in New York, so I shouldn't have been here during those 2 weeks, but 3 days into it, I meet a guy by the name of Jonathan Germer, who then goes on to become one of my absolute best friends.
Oh.
Who I'm staying with right now.
Yeah.
You know? And I often think, again, I'm like, in this strange world, if my passport doesn't get stolen, I don't meet Jonathan Germer.
Yeah. Wow.
And so I think that's why I've almost released myself of having to plan the story. Because I'm like, God has the ability to make a stolen passport turn into a best friend.
Wow.
That's strange.
Oh.
And so I'm like, I submit to your script. I'm not the writer anymore.
That's so
I'll be the extra
good.
in the story. Do you know what I mean?
That's so good. Because, control is fake anyway. Yeah. And on big macro level and micro level. Like, okay, how do you, we're running out of time and I still want to talk about, like, your podcast. But how do you orient yourself in such a way that, like, every day you're present to the story and you're like, wow, this beautiful thing was put in my path. I'm so grateful to see that. Or I'm so grateful for this friend. Like, are there any practices or things you do in your life to like remind yourself that you're in this story, but you don't have to control it, but you're grateful and you're like loving life? You know what I mean? Yeah,
I think I'm not the one that's making this story beautiful. I'm just trying to have fun.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm like, of course I'm going to be a guest on your podcast. Of course I'm going to go meet a friend in a coffee shop. Of course I'm going to go like shopping or whatever. Like all of those things are really just planned out of like, this could be fun.
Yeah.
And then I just have so much trust that along the way something's going to happen. Like, or along this conversation something's going to happen.
Yeah.
Or like while I'm in the coffee shop with my friend and we've got our laptops out and we're kind of just like doing things or whatever, like something's going to happen. And, you know, when I think about the Bible, I'm like, Jesus met people along the way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, especially when I think about, is it John 4 with the woman at the well? I'm like, he was on his way and he had to pass through Samaria and then he meets this woman.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm like, even when I think about these divine friendships, again, they're not these big romantic meet cute moments. They're actually kind of really normal moments where along the way someone gets lost and I'm like, go to the back, your friend's there. Or like, and so I think I'm just hyper aware that it's going to be along the way to things that these kind of like beautiful, magical story moments happen. And so for me, I just kind of plan where I'm going to, just trusting that the Lord will do something really cool with it.
Wow.
So it isn't actually it's if anything, it's not a practice. Like I've fully released myself.
Okay, just like
I'm just so open, and I think the only practice is like just trying to be attentive.
Yes.
Trying to be aware.
Yes.
And just being like, what's around me, what's going on. Like even, you know, in New York, I always visit these two friends, Noah and Marissa, every time I'm in the city. But the way I met them was I was in Rome in 2019 with my mum and brother. We went on this holiday for my birthday. And on our way back to the hotel from the restaurant, there is this guy playing the violin, and he's amazing. And he's like playing all these kind of modern songs, but making them sound like kind of old classical music or whatever. And I'm stood there listening, and I see these these three guys who are so obviously my age, just kind of eating ice cream and like dancing along to the music. And I was like, they look really cool. I was like, I want to be friends with them.
Oh.
And then I just felt something in my spirit. I was like, go talk to them.
Yeah.
And so I go talk to them, and then they were from America, and they were from Virginia. And so we get talking, and I was like, oh, you're from America. I'm going to be in California next week. They were like, do this. Make sure you do this. And it was this really wholesome conversation.
Yeah.
And then we follow each other on Instagram. And then I didn't forget about them, but I kind of just didn't stay in touch with them.
Yeah.
And then about, that was 2019. 3 years later, again, while I'm in New York, post passport being stolen, in extra time, I'm checking my stories. And the girl, Marissa, she posts that she's in New York. And I was like, you're in New York? And she's like, I live here. And I was like, what? And so me, Marissa, and Noah go out for lunch, which was highly risky because I was like, I met them briefly in Rome. They could be really weird.
Yeah.
They could think I'm really weird.
Yeah.
But we end up getting on really well. And so since then, every time I come to New York, I hang out with Marissa and Noah. And I'm like, we met in Rome watching this guy play the violin, And so again, like it's stuff like that where I'm just like, along the way, these beautiful things will happen. I think we just need to get moving and just be open and attentive along the way.
That's so beautiful. And I really think like I just sense so much from you that you're like your inner child is so healthy and like you are a son and that. And I think like for me too, that's a way that it is like this childlike wonder in your life because when you're a kid, you read fairy tales and you read stories where people meet the right person at the just right time and this magical thing happens and it's this kid in this big city doing this beautiful thing. Or, I think of like, I just babysitting the other day, read the Madeline book, which is about this little girl in France to the kid that I was babysitting. And, that's what children's books are about. They're about little kids in big cities who are having adventures and meeting people. And then we get to be grown-ups and we get to have these adventures and meet people. And that I feel like that is such a way that that your inner child is healthy because you're like expecting life to be, and life is also really hard, but like also really beautiful. So, okay, we're so almost out of time, but I really would love to hear on that. Just anything about your podcast or the work you're doing for those who, grew up without fathers and dealing with inner child things.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we're talking about along the way, and even the podcast came about along the way. I didn't sit down for months and go on this sabbatical and be like, we're going to make a podcast. It was like, for example, when I'd left my full-time job and I started freelancing, I remember I went on this long walk. And I was like, God, what do you want me to do with my life? And I felt like God was like, dude, I kind of just want you to rest for a bit and have a bit of fun. So what's something you've always wanted to do?
Wow.
And I was like, I always wanted to be a radio presenter.
Oh!
And so then I go and I join this local radio station and I end up actually reconnecting with a childhood friend of mine from school. And we kind of co-host this show about music.
Oh.
And it was funny because we then had access to this studio with brilliant gear. And before you knew it, I remember just being like, I've spent the last 10 months learning how to operate this. If I wanted to, I could start my own podcast.
Yeah.
And so I had a conversation with the radio director and I was like, hypothetically, if I wanted to start my own podcast, could I use this stuff? He was like, absolutely. Anytime you need it, you just book the studio and you can use it. And I was like, wow, I have access to this amazing studio in England, in Marlow. I have access to this amazing studio in Marlow. And so then really it was just trying to figure out, what do I actually want to do a podcast about? And so I kind of kept that lingering, and about 6 months had gone by. And I remember I went again for a coffee with that mentor who drove me and who became my first client. He's been such a key figure in my life at key moments.
Wow.
And he sits me down for a coffee, and I'd often sit down with him and kind of like, advise him on things to do for social media. I just loved it. Like he'd buy me a coffee and then I'd kind of give him advice, and it was great.
Oh.
And he sits me down and he goes, firstly, this coffee's for you. But secondly, this isn't about work. This isn't about me. He goes, I've watched you over the last few months and I feel like you've just gotten tremendously desaturated and you look exhausted and you look burnt out. And I think it's because you're not doing anything they actually care about. Because like you're just doing other people's things.
Wow.
So he goes, I don't care what it is, you're starting something today. And I was like, firstly, no. I was like, who do you think you are? I was
He's calling you out.
I was like, no, why are you calling me out? And secondly, I've got stuff I got to get done. I'm not about to stop and then pivot and then do this thing over here. And he goes, no, I promise, like, you'll find this newfound energy when you create something that you really care about. And so I rejected him and then get on the tube, the metro in London, and 15-minute tube to get to Oxford Circus to get a coffee with this other mentor of mine, Robbie, who I talked about earlier. And while I'm on the tube, I kid you not, like I'm just kind of sat there, and then I felt like I just heard the first minute of my podcast. And it was this artistic expression where I was leaving a voicemail for my younger self, where I was basically going, look, mate, I know you're going through this right now, but I seriously think if you just listen to this conversation, it could actually give you a ton of hope.
Whoa.
And I loved the idea of it being a fly on the wall. I think there are some podcasts where it works really well to address the audience and be like, hey guys, welcome back. But I love the idea of never addressing the audience. I almost letting the audience feel like they're a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
They're just listening in on something that they maybe shouldn't be, because it's so intimate and it's so vulnerable.
Oh, I love that.
And so I was like, I also want the Apple sound of like, you have one new voice message received from 2021 Jordan Deen. And so then I kind of go on my phone and I type it in on my notes, and I get, you know, when you can do speak, and I make it speak, and then I get these goosebumps. I'm like, wait, this could actually work.
Whoa.
And so I had this raw idea, and I go to this coffee, and it's kind of bugging me. I'm not addressing, I'm not talking about it. And then right at the end, as my mentor was about to leave, I was like, I had this idea, what do you think? And he's this like wonderful, dramatic American guy from like 2 hours south of Chicago. Can never remember the name of it. And he looks at me in the eyes and goes, I'll be angry if you don't do this.
Wow.
So I literally like jet home, and I made like this really basic demo. I used my phone. I used my phone to record the audio. I made this like basic demo, sent it to 5 of my trusted folks, and they all replied instantly, being like, "Do it, shivers! Like let's get this done."
Wow.
And so then I go on this 10-week journey where I basically just make the podcast, and I'd love to say like there was this like conscious brewing within me of this conviction of I need to do this. The truth is like it almost felt like I kind of just fell into it. I was like, this is something I can clearly talk about. I had this amazing epiphany at the age of 21 where I recognized that, you know, I heard this quote that said, our scars can become lighthouses for those heading towards the same rocks we hit. And so I really started to believe in the power of sharing your story.
Yes.
And
that's
just being
so
like,
beautiful.
if you have a fresh wound, but you see my scar, firstly, you'll recognize you're not on your own, but there's also hope for healing. And so I just noticed that I think we just all need to open up about our scars a little bit more.
Yes.
And so,
Wow.
you know, I kind of hit 23 and I was like, I have this deep conviction towards scars and stories. I want to create a space where people can open up about their journey of healing. And so that's what the podcast became. And again, along the way, like it wasn't like I had this whole crazy grand plan. Like I was on my way for a coffee with a mentor. He told me, and then I was on my way to this other coffee, and then I heard the minute in my head, go tell him. And then on my way home, I make all these notes and these plans, and then I'd record the demo, and then I make it. And then honestly, like it wasn't until after the podcast had come out that this ache really began to develop, where I was like, whoa, I actually think this is more than just a passion project. I think this is actually something I want to give my life to.
Wow.
And so it's interesting because it's like, you know, I released it at the end of 2021. We're now in 2024, and nothing has gone public apart from a one-off Father's Day special. But just over the last 2.5 years, there has been so much that I've been doing, whether it's like meeting with people, listening to stories, just becoming like a student of this topic that I've just dedicated my life to. And it's exciting because now I'm working on season 2. I'm 3 episodes in. I recorded an episode yesterday with a friend of ours. And I record 4 more when I get back to London. And then I just get to release season 2. And I myself am a different host and a different person and a different son. And I'm excited for folks to hear those conversations. And so I appreciate you even asking me. This is clearly something that I really, really care about.
Yeah.
And I'm
such
just
a
excited
needed
for what this becomes, you know?
Gosh, yeah. Oh, Jordan, that's amazing.
I'm very grateful. Thank you so much for even holding this space for me to process and share this.
It's been such a delight, and I think just so refreshing. And yeah, the way that you connect with others is amazing, and just the way that you view your life, and you're so open. I think, yeah, we can all learn a lot. Man.
Bless you.
Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
What joy.
Such a joy. Y'all, thanks so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at Tears and Joy Podcast. I'm going to link all of Jordan's links to all his cool things in the show notes. Make sure to follow along too with him, especially season 2 of your podcast. I can't wait. And we will see you next time. Be sure to send this to a friend who you think might enjoy our conversation. We'll see y'all later. Bye.